Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I'm the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain Blended podcast and founder of the Blended Pledge. And I'm excited to be collaborating again with the team at 910 Advisors. Now, I'm joined by Robert and Greg, who I interviewed on Let's Talk Supply Chain towards the beginning of the year. If you missed that episode, go ahead and check it out. It was episode 454, wherever you get your podcasts, after today's session. And today, it's not just us. We're also going to be joined by two more guests. So welcome Mary and Frank, who are going to help us take on our topic today because we're talking about cost to serve. Now, businesses talk a lot about their customer acquisition costs and the processes that go into winning new business. But once a customer is secured and you've fallen into that routine, it can be a lot harder to understand what it actually costs to look after them. Costs are hidden, decisions aren't strategic, and before you know it, your margins have been slowly eaten away. So what can businesses do to spot and stop margin erosion before it's too late? Well, my guests and I are going to be unpacking all of that today. We're going to be taking a closer look at the cost to serve model, what it means, why it matters. We'll also be exploring how to spot hidden costs, how to flag problem areas early, and sharing real-world wins from Crocs and Fender. Plus, we'll be shining a light on the service level matrix and how it can help you align the two critical areas of profitability and customer satisfaction. But that's not all. We also have a case study and an ebook that we're going to be putting into the comments so that you can go and grab some more information about everything that we're talking about today. And remember, if you have any questions throughout the show, please add them to the comments. We're going to get to those a little bit closer to the end of the discussion. And if you're loving the conversation throughout the show, show us some love with some fire emojis. We love those fire emojis in the comments. So before we get started, let's get everybody to introduce yourself. So welcome, everybody. Greg and then Robert, can you let us know a little bit about who you are and your roles at 910 Advisors?
Sure. I'll jump in. Hey, Sarah, thanks for having us, and we're excited to be here. I'm one of the principals at 910 Advisors, and we're a commercial and supply chain advisory and technology company. We've been in business now in one form or another for about the last 8 years, Robert and I working together. I come from a long background in the industry, kind of the hybrid in the group. Started out as an industrial engineer and ended up on the marketing side of the business and did a little bit of everything in between. So again, excited to be here, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Robert.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Greg. Sarah, appreciate you having us as always. Mary, Frank, appreciate you guys popping on with us here too. So Robert Chapman, I'm a principal here at 910 Advisors. I head up all of our delivery and engagements. So I get to actually go enact all these cost to serve things we're going to talk about today.
Awesome. Well, before we get to Mary, you said 910 Advisors and I said 910. What are we going with today?
Let me throw a curveball at you. How's that sound?
Okay.
We're actually rebranding effective 10/1 to Stratify Holdings, and through that will be known as Stratify Services. So 910 will exist for another 26 days. And then we'll
okay, so 910 today and Stratify, you said?
Stratify Holdings effective 10/1. Yep.
All right. That's awesome. Well, Mary, welcome to the show. For anybody who doesn't know who you are, tell us who you are, what you do. Give us a bit of an introduction to Fender. I mean, not that we need one, but.
Yeah, no, you know Fender. It's the world's largest guitar company. In fact, you said put fire emojis in. I'm going to say you can put guitar emojis in.
Guitars!
Yeah. I get to run our global logistics, trade compliance, and distribution teams around the world. So making sure we get guitars in everybody's hands.
Awesome. I love that. And if you're not following Mary on Instagram, you need to, because she shows all of the makings of that in the behind the scenes, and I love it. All right, Frank, welcome to the show. You're from another brand that really doesn't need no introduction, but if you would let us know who you are, what you do at Crocs, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Sarah, for having me on. So I look after supply chain for Crocs. I've been with Crocs for about 5 years, and part of that was in manufacturing supply chain roles for the past 30 years, kind of showing how old I am now. Obviously, folks know Crocs for the iconic clog, the plastic clog, but we also have the Hey Dude brand, which is something that we acquired a few years ago, which is a little more mainline brand that folks know for the Wally and the Windy, which is a little bit of a casual logo. So
Yeah, my family loves the Hey Dude. So
both brands, right? Both brands are like, people just really
and
love
the Crocs.
It's like,
Yeah.
you just find people who are just like, they have a million pairs of either thing, which is awesome. We love that.
Yes. Question for you: is there a Croc emoji? Do we know if there is one or
There
not?
is a Croc emoji, I believe. I think we have one internally. I don't know if it's like.
Okay, so if you're loving the conversation, we want fire emojis, guitar emojis, and Croc emojis as well, because, that's what keeps us going. All right, let's start with the basics. So what is cost to serve? What does it actually mean in supply chain context? Greg, do you want to start us off with that one?
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to take that. I always like to start with, everybody always knows what it costs to acquire a customer, right? There's a lot of expenses when you're going out trying to sell, all the pre-sale, all the things you do to get that customer. But one of the things that gets overlooked is, what does it actually cost you to service that customer? And that's what we find is a lot of people don't understand that. It's not something that you typically have looked at, and it's something that we recognize is really important, because it's the secret sauce, if you will, to kind of get rid of those margin gremlins. I think that's your term, Sarah, that I'm stealing. But I think that's exactly what you need to do to look at that.
Margin gremlins. I love that. And I think that's really what it is, right? Margin erosion, margin gremlins. I want to give a shout out to Juan and Cody over on my personal LinkedIn before we keep going. Thanks so much for joining us. And we've already got some guitar emojis, people. So
Yes.
keep it going. All right, Greg, what are some of the benefits that you think that it can provide to businesses to really be thinking about this, keeping it top of mind?
Well, I think what it really does is, as you step back and you look at that whole chain to get that product to a customer, that's what you have to do. And you have to understand all the pieces and parts. And I think what it really does is it starts to give you a focus now on your business and how you address that business. So you start to get a lens that shows you, well, I've been treating all these customers the same, and actually they're not the same. This one's costing me a lot more to serve them, and I'm not getting the margin that I thought I was. And so that starts to open up that conversation, and it gives you that lens into the business that starts to show you, well, you know what? I always thought this was a really good customer. We sell them a lot of product, but at the end of the day, we're not really getting any return on that because we're spending so much to service them. And so this is what's really important about it. It starts to give you a different way to think about your business and how to dissect it.
Well, and I have to say, because you were both on the show, like I said, at the beginning of the year, and after we had that conversation, I went and looked at my business even closely as well. And mine's in like content and service and things like that. And it got me thinking a lot about what it was that I wanted to do with my business, what it looked like to serve my clients and things like that too. And so this is really across the board. And I think it's a really important topic, and we need to start looking at it a lot more closely. So Frank, I want to bring you into the conversation. How does that visibility help businesses to really truly analyze and understand what that cost to serve looks like across not just customers, but also channels and products like I just mentioned?
Yeah, and I think it's super important to think about it beyond just customer, right? Because we look at it kind of both ways, and we look at it from a channel perspective, because we have wholesale customers, we have retail customers, and we have e-commerce customers. So we really look at those things, those channels, as kind of what's the cost to manage each channel as well, and realizing that you have to balance the cost piece against what you need to do to service those customers effectively, right? Because it's just not all about cost. As much as we love it to be just a straight up cost play, it's really not, right? We need to keep those customers happy, and like what we talk about often is meeting the customers where they are. The other piece I think when we think about it is we kind of look at delivered cost. Particularly when you're in supply chain, it gets really easy to kind of talk about, well, what does it cost us to source the product, the outbound cost? What does it cost to run it through the distribution and logistics channel? But you really have to look at the delivered cost. Sure that you're really understanding kind of beginning to end, what does it cost to get it in that customer's hands? And then what are the different levers you have to manage that cost to serve? And look, we're finding and we're doing a lot of things that, in a lot of ways is somewhat opaque to the customer, but reduces our cost to serve for that customer. They still feel the good service. They still feel they get everything they want, but we're able to do that at a much more effective cost. So I think you just have to kind of make sure you kind of peel the onion back a little bit to kind of look beyond the obvious.
Well, and it's a good point, I think, also around delivery, right? I was talking to somebody on a show just the other day. There's a lot of different delivery options, and people are choosing different delivery options. And so what does that mean? Are they choosing the fastest delivery, but you're not charging for the fastest delivery? And so that cost to serve is very different from a regular delivery, just to sort of put that into context around different delivery options.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example, right? Is how do you deliver the product to the customer, whether it's an e-commerce customer that orders, you get blinded a little bit by what goes on in kind of the Amazon world of everything's theoretically overnight or 2-day delivery, and so I think a lot of us try to race to match that kind of service levels when it. Quite honestly, that could be really prohibitive in terms of the impact on cost. And so I think you really have to assess, well, do I need 2-day delivery or 3-day delivery, or is 4-day delivery acceptable? And honestly, so many people now shop online or get products delivered that they're kind of getting used to a lot of things that we probably thought 2-3 years ago was unacceptable. Now, we're finding that, look, we can probably sacrifice a little bit, right? And still meet the customer where they are, but do that much more cost effectively.
Yeah. And how many times throughout the year did we do that, right? Did we have to do that faster delivery versus regular? And what did that mean for them? So many different things and so many different points where you have to take a look at it to see what it means to service that customer. And I think, when we extend that out, right, to a wider business level, because I think understanding the cost to serve is more than just a tool for finance. It's also a really great tool for supply chain and understanding the customer a little bit better too. And I think it can be leveraged across multiple other critical areas. So Mary, can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is not just cost. If it was cost, a lot of our jobs would be easier, right? But it is, how are you differentiating? How are you creating value? Are you trading off some savings over here for something over here that's cost? I mean, you talked about with the transportation spend. Can we take 3 or 4 days and make sure we've invested in a good communication tool to the consumer so they understood what that delivery is for every cost per package flow? But I also think paying attention internally to, you're selecting vendors and they may not be customer facing immediately, but they're upstream from that customer experience. And are you buying a commodity? Or are you buying a service? And how does that show up? What are you actually solving for in the organization needs to come into those conversations. So something might come with a cost increase in your P&L, but actually it might help with consumer satisfaction down the road, or repurchasing behaviors that in turn help with turns, right? So you can't just look at it within your silo. You've got to look across the entire organization, but then external to organization, also challenging, how have you set up your supply chain, and how does that differentiate you against other competitors in the industry, and what your consumer experience is? And are you actually, maybe you're paying a little bit more for something, but you're doing it in a way that sets you aside from others, or you're driving, ideally, cost savings, and you're more competitive than potentially some of the other peers that are out there in the industry.
Yeah, it's such a great point, because we talk about how in supply chain, we're all kind of siloed and we need more collaboration. We need more internal collaboration and external collaboration. But what you're really talking about is if somebody's making an investment over here, or they're making a decision over here, and it affects supply chain, how does it affect the cost to serve to the customer? Right. And sometimes we don't even know what kind of impact that's going to have either down the line or even across the organization.
And on that front,
Hey, Sorry, Robert. I just wanted to touch on something really important that Mary said, and I think it gets lost. Is you have to look at that whole chain. To her point, you push a button over here and it causes something else to jump up over here, and unless you understand the consequences of those decisions, it does have an impact. But I think the thing that she said that was really important, and this is what I was talking about, how it starts to change your lens and your focus, is you may add something to the cost that gives your customer satisfaction, but it's worth it to you to do that. So it's all about understanding what is that total cost to serve. It's not necessarily always trying to lower it, to her point, but it's understanding it, and then that lets you make those strategic decisions the right way.
Mm-hmm.
And Greg, I'd add to that, right? It's always a trade-off conversation, right? Because we're always kind of managing the trade-off between cost and service level and customer satisfaction, right? And I think, the most effective organizations that manage this are really managing the trade-offs that they're making kind of consciously versus it being a cost conversation or a service conversation or a satisfaction conversation.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and I think also understanding that it's not necessarily just one dramatic event. It's more of a constant slow burn that you probably sometimes don't even notice, but over time makes a really big impact to the bottom line, right? That margin. So, Robert, I want to bring you into the conversation. What are some common examples of hidden costs that contribute to that margin erosion? We've talked about a couple here, but I think there's quite a few more.
There are. It really depends on where you start in the process, right? One of our all-time favorites is, do people really understand their carry cost? And we don't mean carry cost just at the distribution center. Do you have detention you're paying, right? Do you have source factor you're paying for that? Is it sitting at your wholesaler along that needs to sit there, right? It's sitting on distributor books. Where is that sitting? And what is your true cost to carry that good? That's, again, just every day eating at your margin. Your fixed cost isn't going away, right? It's going to keep rising against that. And one thing we love to do to tell people is run a matrix of what does that good cost you versus how long has it set, and at what point does it cross that from an obsolescence standpoint that, congratulations, your part or your widget right now cost you more to sit on it than it would have to actually make money on it. And it's kind of eye-opening when you actually run that report really quickly to see, because then it really gets people thinking differently about, oh my God, wait, my fixed costs are X. Yeah, I shouldn't be doing this. That's one very common one. Another one we see too is utilization. I love when people give us these very pretty utilization charts that say, hey, we're at 99% utilization on freight or on labor or on these other things. And you step back and you go, wait, hold on. But we're at that utilization rate because it's what we have. But is that really what it should be? Right. And it's because it's what you know, not what you should be doing. And then you get in this fallacy that just because the KPI is green, that everything's good. That's our other favorite is, you're 99% utilization, but you might have 3 people against that utilization that just are milking it, right? So being able to really understand and unpack your KPIs against utilization is key. And then finally, our favorite is touches. Mary and Frank, I'm assuming we all know about how many times you have to touch a good and how much that increases cost, correct?
And it's not just touching goods, right? It's touching the orders.
Yes.
Right. I mean, we find there's far more touches on orders than there is on the physical goods. And that those touches on the orders are actually probably some of the most expensive touches that we do in our organization.
Yeah. Frank, would you say that touches are the only hidden cost, or what are some of the other hidden costs that would impact that profitability in real term?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the touches are the single most, visible and kind of visceral impact on cost. But look, there's also like in any business where, a product has a lifespan, right? And it's certainly when you're in, fashion and apparel and footwear, products have a lifespan. So like balancing that, that cost to serve and how much inventory do I keep versus the risk that a season goes by and now you've got to discount that inventory to dispose of it. Like that's another element. I think it's like a hidden element of cost to serve, right? Because we always think about cost to serve in terms of availability of the inventory for a customer when they need it.
Yes.
But if you hold that inventory for too long, then it's a different conversation we're having.
Yeah, well, and it's capital costs if you hold it for too long. But then also, and we haven't really leaned into this, and I'm not sure if we will later on in the conversation, but also the returns. How long does it take to potentially get that product back on shelf? Because then that capital is not just in the warehouse, right? That capital is on show floor, it's in somebody else's inventory that needs to come back to yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Mary, do you think there's any red flags to look out for? I mean, maybe some common traps that businesses sometimes fall into. I mean, we were talking about touches, right? And Frank said that that's one of the most apparent ones, but that's really only if you're monitoring it. So, how do we catch these things?
Yeah. Well, I think certainly there's traps, right? I think a big one is going to be, like Frank said, the touches. The because it's always been that way attitude can be one of the biggest kind of red flags to me of like, okay, we got to double click on this because those touches can be masked in because it's always been that way. And you've got to slow down to understand, to learn before you can make improvements. So I think another good example of a red flag is the math isn't always reality, meaning you can build a business case for something, but if you used averages, which are two extremes that come together somewhere and those extremes change, you're already off course. If you use assumptions that could change and you didn't clearly document what those assumptions were, if you didn't create an agile model even to be able to move forward with it, or lack of cross-functional alignment and assumptions of, hey, there's going to be this big business case because somebody's going to come to the table and do X, Y, and Z, therefore it's unlocked. You can immediately erode on what some of those potentials are. So just that hubris, I guess, of either using bad numbers or not being adaptive to things. The perfect scenario can create a lot of risks because implementation or timeline or cost, like these are all things that in time can erode any of those opportunities that you do eventually identify in that cost to serve once you double click on fixing it.
Yeah, I love that you said slow down. Because I don't think a lot of people want to hear that. Everybody's sort of like speeding up because tech is driving change and everybody needs to get on board and things like that. What do you do when you present that sort of slow down scenario to figure things out before you can fast forward?
Yeah, I think a big piece is you have to understand, and there is a educate to bring along. You have to understand where do you need to slow down and address or fix. Like I think AI and chatbots and agentic agents are a big focus area, but if your data quality isn't great or your processes and procedures are not fully established, you just automate a process that's not fantastic. So it's not as easy as just deploy this and everything will go away. There is a slow down to assess, to create fixes that have a longer term ROI. But you're right, there's a pressure on many people and companies to get savings, get it yesterday, and make fixes. The ramification of going fast and hard can have cost implications because you moved fast and you didn't slow down to actually do due diligence in the business case.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's all about balance because if you move too fast and make the wrong decisions, you're kind of back to where you were before, and you might be 6 months down the line. But I appreciate you for sharing that because I think it's important to know when to slow down and when to speed up. And like you said, there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And so, but I don't think like margin erosion isn't really just a pricing issue, right? It's not just about raising your prices and that's going to solve all your problems. Let's talk a little bit about that, but also talk about how some of the other issues are at play. Robert, I want to go to you and then Frank, I'll have you follow up on that one.
Yeah, so to your point, it'd be great if price was a solve. We'd all just love to say, hey, raise it 5%. If that was the case, right, we'd all probably have much easier jobs. To Mary's point about cost, if cost and price are your two levers, the world would be a much simpler place. It's not. And through that reality, right, with cost to serve, it truly is an end-to-end solve. You need finance involved, you need sourcing involved, you need the product marketing teams involved, because it all starts from product development really forward at the end of the day, right? And even service development, if you're not product business, right? It all starts with what are you trying to do to serve your customer? And if you understand that, you can then actually build out that end-to-end value chain map and see the bottlenecks. Because you may even find out the supply chain is being bottlenecked because product decided to use a non-authorized vendor that's not the toolkit, right? And now we add 6 weeks to the process because X vendor is not in the mix, right? Or another one, favorites is you work with, on the front end, you end up working with the retail team, and something got to retail, and retail now can't move it because it's not the exact widget they wanted. It should have went to wholesale, right? Back to understanding your mix of that end to end is key, because then you understand, where did I shove what I fixed downstream, to Greg's earlier point. Otherwise, if you just fix it in little areas, you keep moving the problem, and those gremlins keep getting bigger. They don't get smaller, because as you guys know, those commitments get bigger at each step of the way. If you fix it at the source and you see how it goes to the live stream, you can see it across the board.
It brings up an example. I was talking to somebody a while ago about packaging. Like, one wrong decision in packaging can be like absolutely, positively the worst thing for supply chain in some respects, right? Especially if it's not packaged properly and there's damage, and you can't get that product for another 8 weeks. I mean, there's all sorts of ramifications from that. Frank, did you have anything to add to what Robert had to say?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think just really build on what Robert said, right? I think one is you like, when you look at kind of your end-to-end value stream, like from order to cash, like when we think about it that way, I think you have to look at where the effort is happening. And quite often where the effort is happening is just not obvious. And like, one of the things that we've been doing and focusing on is kind of looking at where there's tasks that are happening, where we have like a large group of people who are doing the same tasks, solving the same 2 or 3 problems day after day after day, right? And then kind of challenging, like, why are they solving those problems, right? Why do we have to solve those problems on a daily basis? And it, like, I know for us, it really started to kind of like pull out in the kind of the supply chain value chain, right? Within that, like, boy, we've got some areas where we've got a lot of people doing this same fairly simple job. And when you start to probe and kind of, lift the hood on that and look underneath, you start to find like what's really driving costs in your supply chain. And I referenced it earlier, like the number of touches that an order has. That's an example where we started to look at that, and we're seeing like the average order was having like, I think it was like 30 touches to an average order from the time it was placed to the time it was fulfilled. And we started to really challenge and question that, and you learn a lot about what's driving your costs when you do that. Because quite often the problems you find are just not at all what you expected to find. Hey, the other piece, and it's a little bit adding on what Mary said, but I think it's related here, right? The other piece is, there's always this desire to go fast and solve problems, but quite often a lot of those problems come because you don't have standardized processes and procedures, right? And so that it's really challenging to convince an organization or convince a team. They've actually got to stop and standardize their practices first,
right?
You really think about improving. And that's like probably one of the most challenging pieces that I think we've been through, is the desire to say, okay, we have to stop and standardize first, and then we'll go forward with the improvements. But when you take that discipline and the time to do that, you actually see the improvements go a lot faster.
And that's what we were talking about, slowing down to speed up, right? And I think that's a really great point, Frank, that you added in there, is like, what does that actually look like? And it's a tough spot because your team doesn't necessarily want to slow down and want to document and really look under that hood, because things could be working, right? And they're used to it happening on a daily basis. And it also means change.
Yeah,
it does, right? And you're kind of forcing the issue of addressing, managing the problems versus solving the problems, right? And most of our teams, they're great at managing problems, right? But when you actually say, no, we actually just have to stop managing them and solve the problems, that it gets really hard when you have to.
Well, and that sort of brings me to the next point, because I want to talk about being proactive rather than reactive, because that's really what you're talking about, Frank, right? Is that we want to be more proactive. We want to be solution oriented. We want to solve for those problems and not necessarily be in the weeds and managing that every single day. So Greg, I'm going to take that over to you. How do we flip that script, right? How can we identify problems quickly? What's the impact to the businesses to go from reactive to proactive? And I can start with Greg, and then Mary, I'll have you follow up.
Sure. No, no, Sarah, without, risking repeating what Frank said, but I think he's exactly right. The steps to be proactive versus reactive is slowing down. And that's the proactive approach. So the slowdown is to look at everything and analyze all those different pieces and parts, as Frank said, across the value chain. And you start to see where those heavy spots of work are happening and those things are impacting that flow. And I think that's how you do that. And to his point right now, everybody's running fast because they're just trying to keep up with the business. They're trying to fix the problems that are happening. And a lot of those problems are happening because we haven't taken that proactive approach to step back and understand what are the different levers that are impacting us and causing us to do that. And I think that's where you start to really see the impact of cost to serve on your business, is when you can see that full value chain and understand what are the levers I'm pulling and what do they do when I pull that. And you've got to have that total visibility to do it. And that's what gives you that.
Mm-hmm. Mary, do you have anything to add to that?
Am I supposed to just say what Frank said? Because that's what Frank said. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I'll double down.
Oh, Mary, I've missed you.
No, I think my ad would be, the point I think we're all making is this isn't just a procurement exercise, right? It's not like go and look at your list of vendors and who you're spending the most with and go and renegotiate those contracts. That's kind of the given. That's the table stakes of what you're doing all the time. But this is really a cultural thing. That visibility and alignment and methodology for measurement and how you're measuring and how that cost to serve comes to the table, where that spend is, but then really slowing down to look at process and procedure. I think most importantly, it's also making sure within the organization, you've got the right culture that you're creating that is of innovation, that's of reframing solutions, that's not of, you're not saying, hey, we've all been in places where we've worked, where we've had a new leader come in and the new leader immediately is like, well, that process sucks. And here's why. And you're sitting there being like, that process was my baby and I created it, right? So you've all been in those places that it's not about attacking, it's about evolving. And there's so much cultural energy that goes into making sure all people and places within the organization understand that this optimization is not anything personal, that ego needs to be stepping aside, and that you need to drive simplification over time.
Yeah, I'm so glad you jumped in here with that, because you brought up a couple of things for me, right? There's inherent bias, not only in, decisions and procedures and processes that we've put in place, but it's human nature, right? We find it in data, we find it in processes, et cetera, et cetera. And so we need to take a look at that. But what you really talked about was change management. And when I think about technology and change management, they're like 20% of that is technology. Well, it kind of goes across the board, right? If you're going to look at everything, 80% is change management and the culture that comes behind it. And that's how you can make changes quickly, is by focusing also on that change management piece and making sure everybody understands why we need to slow down and do this first. If they don't understand it, it's just going to take a long time, because, it's not necessarily part of what they do on a day-to-day basis. And it means that they might have to put some extra hours in to get what they do on a day-to-day basis done. Right. So many things to think about. Now, I want to let everybody know we are putting a link to an ebook in the comments. It's called Uncover Hidden Profitability with Cost to Serve Analysis. So I know you're furiously taking notes, but also we're going to give you an ebook with all of this information as well. So go and click on that link. And if you have any questions, make sure to put them in the comments. I want to say hi to Angela over on my personal LinkedIn. Thanks so much for joining us. So we've talked about identifying the problem, but how do we track it? How do we measure it? Like, what does success look like? Now, Robert, you mentioned earlier a matrix. I don't know if you called it the service level matrix, but talk to us about what this service level matrix is and how does it help us track it and measure it?
Sure. Yeah. So the service level matrix is kind of what we were talking about earlier, that end-to-end value chain. A service level matrix purpose is working from your customer back. What is the value you're providing to your customer from a product, a service perspective? What are your touch points with that customer? Then you work your way backwards from a prioritized perspective, right? If you're clear on what value you provide to the customer, how you do that, and the mechanisms you use to do that through your supply chain, through your product development, through your finance capabilities, right, through technology capabilities, you're going to make smarter decisions, smarter investments, as well as just be more informed about what you're doing and where you're at from a profitability standpoint. For us, a service level matrix is truly understanding how you're serving your customer, how you want to measure serving your customer. And it also helps you understand where you're, one, maybe not meeting the mark with your customers, two, where you should prioritize investments, and then three, which we often see a lot of, when people do that exercise, they realize they're getting penalized for doing things that they're not charging the customer for, or a value add to the customer. That comes up so many times that this enlightens them that goes, wait, others aren't doing this, but my customers are mad at me and I'm giving to them for free. Right. It's a great example that I know Frank brought up earlier. Is 2 days enough? Is 3 days enough? Is 4 days enough? I mean, the answer is, until you know that, you either are, one, providing them more service than they need. They might be complaining about it because you've set a precedent you need to set. So this service level matrix really help you prioritize and understand how you should design the rest of your business process, as well as systems and people, to support your customer. And it's a foundational thing, because once you understand that, you'll make a lot better decisions down the line.
Well, yeah. And I mean, you don't know sort of the process that your client potentially has in their warehouse to receive product, right? So that 2, 3, or 4 days could mean the difference of bringing in maybe temps or not, or having enough staff to actually offload that truck or container or whatever that looks like. Greg, how does the service level matrix help businesses align service offerings with that customer value? I think Robert gave us a glimpse into it, but I want to bring you in.
Yeah, no, I think for me, what it does is it gives you the ability to understand that not every customer is created equal, right? With one of our customers we've been working with recently, they treated everybody the same. Everybody had the same access to order, the same delivery windows, the same service, everything was the same. But when you boiled it down, you looked at it, there's a lot of very small customers that's spending very little money with them, that's not making a lot of money for the company, and they're getting that same level of treatment. So it gives you the opportunity to look at that and make decisions around, do we want to service those customers the same way we do others, right? And one of my favorite things that always comes up and I like to talk about is, we do things for customers all the time that we don't charge them for. They may call and ask if you're in the apparel business for a special hanger that they want their product put on. They may ask for tags. There's all these things and they add up over time. And we all too often don't charge our customers for that. And so what we've done in the past is we go and we tell the customers what that costs, and we intend to charge them. But, oh, by the way, now it can become a negotiation tool. They may not want to pay that, but if they don't, then they can order more product, right, and offset that cost. So there's ways to use these things that helps you now to look at your customers and identify them as being, either different or handled differently.
Right. Absolutely. And more of a strategic partnership at that point, right? Rather than transactional. So Mary and Frank, it's now your time to shine. And not that you haven't shined this whole conversation, but I want to get into the case study part of this because I love a good case study. I don't know who doesn't. And I know you're both going to have a lot of great insights to share with us. So what problems were you seeing at Fender and Crocs, Mary?
I think on it, like you said, every retailer is experiencing pressure and just controlling costs in this current moment. I think that's agnostic to the two brands that are on this phone call. And I think the most important things are, as part of that, like I talked about earlier, is this part of your culture? Are you looking at total cost to serve? And what is that North Star at all levels? And some of that's going back to basics and making sure you have the right information, the right data. You're going back and doing audits on historical information and putting ego aside to make sure, certainly when we go back and do freight audits of different kinds or different control audits, did we do the right thing in the past? And are there hidden gems and things that we've already paid for that we need to make sure we go and claw back? Other examples certainly are SKU rationalization. I think it was Robert brought that up at the very beginning. That's the classic. It doesn't matter what brand you are, constantly making sure you're clearly explaining true cost to serve, whether it's within your silo or beyond, when SKU controls can be limited or you're not actually nipping that tail in the bud that's driving a lot of costs throughout the supply chain. Customer reviews. So one example is some of our top customers Either here or in my past life, we would do workshops with the top customers to say, how do we help each other's supply chain? How do we drive margin improvements across the board to make sure we're creating solutions that are mutual? Because certainly you can go and negotiate contracts, but it could be just passing cost back and forth. And then the next time it comes around, it just comes back to you. But really, how are we creating solutions together that drive innovation? How do I slow down to learn? You made the joke about processing things inbound in a warehouse. I love to go to our customers' docks and watch things inbound. And best case is when my truck pulls up, because you can actually see what unloading, handling, and processing looks like. You can see even within maybe the customer's solutions where they're just putting up with a constant issue because it's always been that way, right? And you say, we can fix that and we can make it quicker to put it to stock. And challenging the customer, what helps your cost to serve so that it can help our cost to serve, so that we can have speed through the warehouse into available stock and sellable for our customers at the end of the day. And then Sarah, you hit on another one is kind of the aftermath of the supply chain. Returns and reverse logistics, I think, can be a huge gremlin area. That's messy. It's gross. Nobody wants to deal with it. But returns rates are going up and up and up, right? And has been since 2020 and continues to. So really double clicking on that cost to serve and have you optimized and kind of mastered that return to stock solution. So just a few examples of places where certainly I've double clicked in the past.
Yeah, no, I love that. And one of the things I was thinking about when you were talking about that, because you mentioned SKU and I automatically went to data. And I was like, part of the cost of service, if you're using the wrong data or the data is no good, or, one department is calling it or spelling it this way. And like, the data is not matching up. And that's got to be a big part of it too, right?
Yeah, data can be such a amazing tool when it works right, and you can be data rich. But if the data has quality issues or variances across different departments, or really, sometimes you can use data to tell one story one way and another the other way. And somebody might be just framing it in a way that doesn't actually look holistically at total landed cost to serve or total cost to deliver, rather than just within their own P&L. It's a good metric, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Frank, how did you leverage the cost to serve model or even the service level matrix that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things we've done, right? I think probably the biggest one is as we've looked at the different segments in our business, right? We have created differentiated service models for those segments, right? And truly spend time to understand what each customer in that segment really, really needs. Because what our retail stores need is completely different than what our wholesale customers need, is completely different than what our e-commerce customers need. And so trying to get really deep understanding of what's required there. I think the other piece from a supply chain perspective, and this is near and dear to me because we kind of get into this as a supply chains always get into this of like those pesky customers. If they would just, do this. But we got to understand and always start from, and our teams always need to start from, that without the customers, there is no supply chain, right? So we have to kind of meet the customer where they're at. And obviously we want to try to, convince them to do things. But kind of to build on what Mary said, like you just got to understand where the customer is at, what are their pain points, and the more that you can understand, particularly I think when you look at like retail and wholesale, if you can understand their supply chains and the challenges they have, a lot of times you can get to a trade-off conversation that's a much more effective trade-off conversation than just you're asking for all these things that cost me a whole bunch of money. It's much more effective if it's, hey, here's some things that you asked for that we're going to assume that you need. It does cost us money, but here's some opportunities that we see that we can offset those costs for you so that we both come out of this, in a good position.
Yeah. And why exactly are you asking for that?
I think we're asking for
no, I mean, like you ask the customer that question, right?
Exactly.
Why exactly are you asking for that? Do you really need it?
It's a super interesting point, right? Because we're actually finding, like, as we go through some of those conversations with customers, we're having customers who are literally saying to us, like, we still ask for that?
Right.
Like, we haven't needed that for like the past 5 years. And so like, it's a great point, right? Just getting that conversation in front of them of like, do you realize you asked for this? Do you still need those things? Right? And then offering them like understanding their supply chain and how they operate. A lot of times we're finding there's easy things that we can do that make our customers' lives dramatically easier.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and the impact of that is that it's more of a partnership, right? And you can come back to the team and be like, we were doing this, this, and this before. We don't have to do all those things anymore. We can do 3 out of the 5, right? Because we've talked to the customer and things like that. But also for them, they're now realizing what they are doing to the partnership as well. And you can have better discussions and ask better questions.
Yes.
And Sarah, you know something there that's key, right? Everyone remembers when you went through open book accounting with source factories back in the day, right? Oh my God, we're going to share with the factories what we're making, what you're making. It was shattering, right? We're seeing that same evolution with customers now too, right? Everyone is in it to make the most margin possible together, right? As long as we all view it as a end-to-end partnership these days versus I have to keep everything behind closed doors, where the market's headed. And I think the more we all embrace that, the more we're all going to have a better cost to serve from the product side, from the service side, all the way down to the distributors and the retailers, to your point.
Yeah. Well, and I want to get to the competitive advantage, but before we do that, first, I want to ask Mary, Fender and Crocs are both large retail businesses, right? Do you think this approach can work for anyone?
Yeah, unquestionably. I think it's regardless of size difference, the approach and methodology is the same. And, you might have different buying power in your procurement solution, but at the end of the day, your touches per order, in fact, the smaller you are, that costs even more potentially, right? And then there's scaling as well and being aware of kind of different phases of growth throughout company. But unquestionably, it's the same no matter what size of company.
Yeah. And we've got some great comments in the comments right now. So if you're over on the Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn, go and check those out. I want to put them on the screen, but they're going to completely wipe out Frank and Mary. So I don't want to do that, but I want to give a shout out to those putting in those comments on there. Now, let's talk about this real quick. And just so everybody knows, if you have any questions, put them in the comments. Now is the time to do that because we've got about 14 minutes left in the conversation. We want to make sure that we can get to those. But it's a bit of a tough market right now, right? We all kind of know it. Costs are high. Everybody's trying to get them under control. But also customer expectations have never been higher. Or maybe some customer expectations are really high and nobody quite knows which ones we have to address or not. So we need to have those conversations. But really focusing on customer satisfaction is a real driver for that competitive edge, Robert, that you were talking about earlier. So Frank, can you talk to us about how cost to serve can kind of help bridge the gap and help with that competitive advantage?
Yeah, obviously, the way we look at it, right, is we always look at kind of the margins in our business as a way to drive growth, right? And I think this is probably less, people tend to think of margins, I want to have maximum margin to make the most profitability we can make. And there's a certain truth to that. But there's also, from a supply chain and cost to serve basis, the better that we can do reducing our cost to serve, the more that we give the business the ability to invest in further growth, right? And if you think about what the mission of supply chain really should be in a company, it should be about to fuel the growth and the long-term health of the company, right? You can only cost cut so much before you kind of you could get into this death spiral of you've cut costs and your customers are dissatisfied, right? So you have to think about it as, look, supply chain has to be a weapon for growth in the company. And the way to do that is by finding the most efficient ways to service the customers and allow the business to take that and reinvest it into growth for the business. So that's how we think about it, as a kind of a competitive weapon.
Yeah, and I like giving the space and giving the business an opportunity to reinvest back into other areas, especially when there's a lot of technology being talked about right now. There's a lot of investment going into technology. And so we need to be reinvesting in the business in a variety of different ways. Now, Robert, how does this cost to serve model help us move from gut feel decisions, which I'm hoping most people are moving away from, towards smart data driven strategies, because that's what everybody's looking for?
And I think I'll first answer that and say, I don't think we've ever seen perfect data. Anyone that has is lying. Most companies want to call a data swamp. They say they collect all this data, and that's wonderful news, right? We're glad you do that. But for cost to serve, it's really about the right data, to your point, to move that to the direction. The biggest point of feedback we give people to make sure they stop doing gut-based decision is start with the right data. So what are the key things you want to track, and what are the data elements that are required for those things to get started, right? That's really the first key piece. You don't need 1,000, you need 10 or 20, whatever the case may be, to drive the right KPIs, to drive the right information, to drive the right insights. Once you have that, you can then start moving away from gut, because what you actually find when you have too much data is you have the opposite problem of I'm now deluged with so much information. I have my FP&A team or my data team spending hours and hours trying to sort through this to help me get the insights. And by the time they've gotten to you, I think Mary made the point earlier about averages of averaging and averaging averages. By the time they've made it to you, you now have a problem that is no longer data driven, but actually back to gut, because someone in data made a decision that this column equals this column, even then to a business user, it does not equal the same.
Right.
So the short answer is truly that get the right data sets down first, the simplest ones, and take the first step to then not make gut decisions, but don't try to make it transformational. Truly start small, get the right data for the right pieces, map your value chain, understand those pieces, then drive forward. If you do that, you will start to pivot out of gut check mode.
I love that, because those are tangible. Sorry, go ahead, Frank.
No, I was just going to add to what Robert said. And we have a term for it we use. It's false precision, right? And you be really careful about that when you get into like the whole data piece, because it can easily become an exercise in false precision. And you said something, Robert, that's like super, we deal with this every day, right? Which is, there's assumptions on assumptions on assumptions to get to what we believe is a precise number for something. And you realize that there's probably like 5 assumptions built in. So it's precise, but it's false.
Yeah.
Like it's in a lot of ways can be fictitious, right? And so you have to be careful about false precision when you're doing this stuff, and realize directional quite often is good enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And going back to what I said around bias, there's also bias in data too. And when we get some of the information from the data to help us make those decisions, how are we processing that? And is there any bias in us not moving forward or in questioning some of the information that's coming to us? And I think another important point about this is that it's not a quick fix. Right. I think we all have to realize that we're on a journey and not necessarily a destination. Right, Mary? Like this is an ongoing process.
Yeah, it is ongoing. It is so easy to fall into traps of data perfection. And what if we just had one more piece of information? And, the false precision is a perfect way to say it, that we can tell ourselves we're going to get to the perfect answer if we have just one more piece of information. And it's just, you can't get there. There is a element that you've got to know when to take some risk and be directionally accurate and just take action on something, right? But I think also, supply chain, as we all know and have lived through, especially in the last, call it 8 years, is no longer behind the scenes and silent and unseen. It is actually a strategic advantage for many companies, or weapon of growth, as Frank said, right? It really is an area where you've got to start being adaptable and constantly challenging. So I think it's like, you can't go to the gym and like deadlift your body weight overnight. Just like that, you can't create this type of culture and attitude and growth and confidence in taking risk decisions without perfect data that tells you it's the right way to go. It comes with time, and it comes with some building muscles for agility in your organization. So you get out of kind of crisis mode and you start getting into agility. Means we constantly are reassessing, we're adapting, we're evolving, we're double checking. And we're driving towards a solution that may be directionally accurate and not perfect. And it's okay, because it's better than yesterday. And we're making every day better than the day before, to move things forward and control cost. So, you basically need to slowly get into a place where culturally this kind of being offensive or defensive within the supply chain is part of your toolkit. And you're constantly collaborating across the organization to challenge that mindset.
Yeah. Well, and like you said with the weights, you might be able to, but you're going to be super sore or like really hurt yourself. Nobody wants that. All right. Well, I want to give you all an opportunity to talk about one thing that people should walk away thinking about or taking action on from today's discussion. And so I think we're going to head there before we wind this down. And Greg, maybe you can touch on how people can start when I get to you. So, Mary, what's one thing that you want people walking away, taking action on, or thinking about?
I want to challenge for kind of people leaders who are on the call at any level, what are you doing to help drive cost to serve and margin controls within your organization strategically or culturally? You're creating an environment where this is part of the DNA, or are you driving through fear and goals that nobody knows how to get to those goals pragmatically? The team creating models and tools that are flexible and agile, or are the team creating fixed tools that then they're recreating over and over again to model this stuff out? Or as a leader, are your biases actually hindering progress? So really taking just a moment to not just listen to this and say, what are tools I can use and go and chase as a solution, but reflect internally on, as a leader, are you enabling this mindset before you go and ask it of yourself and your team?
I want to know from the audience who's accepting that challenge. Just write in the comments, challenge accepted, Mary. All right. Frank, what's one thing you'd like people walking away from this discussion with?
I would say I'm going to give you two things, because I think these two things go hand in hand. I think the first thing is you really got to make sure you deeply understand what your customers need, right? I think starting with I'm going to reduce cost to serve is great, but if you don't truly understand what the customer's needs are, you run the risk of really alienating your customer base. Sure. So I'd say spend the time, really deeply understand what the customer's needs are. I think the part two is you got to look at your own value chain and just see where are the people and what are they doing? And when you start to see those large groups of people that are doing the same thing like again and again and again, you got to start to challenge, like, why do I have 100 customer operations people touching orders every day, right? Why do I have 20 people loading containers every day? And then just start to kind of like look at what drives the cost in your supply chain, because chances are you're going to find this whole hidden, factory of problems that you got to just kind of sign up for and say, we're not going to go manage the problems well. We're going to go solve the problems once and for all.
I love that. Go from manage to solve. Thank you, Frank. All right, Greg, how can people get started?
Well, I think, it's a kind of interesting thing that Mary brought up. Supply chain is always looked at, or has been looked at, as just a cost place, right? Where all the costs are. And I think it's an opportunity for supply chain to step up and kind of rise to the forefront. As she mentioned earlier, that, in the last 8 years, supply chain has risen to the forefront. So take advantage of that within your company and take a leadership role and start to have this conversation and educate the organization about cost to serve. That one will give you attention and that you're trying to do the right thing and help, but also it'll get you to thinking about things as a company differently. The one thing we've learned when we've worked with companies around this is it changes people's mindset. They start to view things differently when they're thinking about it through this lens. And so I think that's where you start, is you first educate your company, and then you start doing that analysis that everybody here has talked about.
Absolutely. All right, Robert, you've got kind of the last word, because then I'm going to go into an outro, but over to you.
Sure. So I want to piggyback off something Frank said there too. We used to have a board member that would tell us we need to avoid the swarm effect. And for anyone that ever played youth soccer, there's a swarm effect concept where when you're in that 3 to 5 year old stage, what does everybody do? We all swarm the ball. And he told me at one point when he set me down, and he said, everyone's swarming the ball. And I looked back and I stepped back and said, oh, you're right. I have 20 people trying to solve one problem. Back to Frank's point about managing problems. I don't need 20 people to manage the problem. I just need one person to fix the problem. And that mindset shift, when he told me that, really got me thinking differently about the swarms problem. So I just want to give Frank kudos for that one. The second one, and for those that know me on the call, is good is good enough, and take the first step. The worst thing you can do is not take the first step. Always lean towards action. And if you don't lean towards action, you are inaction, and that is typically worse than not doing anything. And slowing down to speed up is an action, so the group's clear. But you have something. Take the first step.
Amen.
Yeah, that is such a good point. Slowing down is an action step. So take a look at that one. Remember, we've got links in the comments to the ebook. We also have a case study in there as well. So head over there, click on the links, and go get that today. But that brings us to the end of today's discussion. I want to thank Greg, Mary, Robert, and Frank for joining me today. I mean, it's been such a valuable discussion because hidden costs can have a huge impact on your business before you even realize it. We've talked about that today. So to hear exactly how understanding your cost to serve and even leveraging it to build a service level matrix, to me is just fascinating because I'm taking some of this and putting it into my business as well. The impact, I think, of being able to find that balance between cost and customer, switching to strategic decision making, is going to have a lot of benefits to businesses and also bottom line. So if you want to find out how you can protect your profits with smarter supply chain decisions, go and check them out at 910advisors.com, not 910, 910. And a big thank you to all of you for listening, watching, and commenting today. I'll see you all again soon, and I really appreciate you all for coming on the show. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody.